This morning's Dharma talk is entitled Hatred and Racism. Is there a spiritual solution? What is your original face? What is your original race? Also known as think neither good nor evil. Case number 23 from the Gateless Gate. One version of this koan is worded, do not think of good, do not think of evil. At this very moment, what is your original face before your mother and father were born? Of course, in our common sense understanding, you had no face before your parents were born. And of course, you had no race either. The expression original face has been used since the earliest days of Chinese Zen to refer to the ultimate reality you perceive only when you have removed all delusions about conceptual reality or the small self. Prejudice and discrimination have affected people all over the world. People unjustly branded as being inferior, undesirable, or even repugnant, merely because of their ancestry or the color of their skin. Here in the United States, Native Americans have been banished to remote reservations, and Blacks were enslaved, then later subjected to strict segregation. Sadly, each new wave of immigrants to land on American soil were victimized by those who had migrated here only a generation or two before. A quick glance at the news tells us that racism is at the heart of many of the divisions in the United States. The current national climate of racial profiling is out of control as Black people are policed and profiled for everything from meeting in Starbucks, shopping, sitting at a traffic light, taking a run or jog, or just standing on the sidewalk. Simply existing in public space as a Black person in America could be a life-threatening situation. In India, Hindus born in certain families belong to a so-called lower caste, have been marginalized and oppressed. Today, social evils like these still cause untold suffering. Prejudice and discrimination have been addressed again and again by governments, by major religious institutions, and by various social organizations. In 2015, a contingent of Buddhist leaders visited the White House to discuss what Buddhists can do to address issues like climate change, racism, and anti-violence. Yet, in spite of all their efforts, these problems stubbornly persist, perhaps because they are so deeply embedded in human culture. Maybe the problem with social inequality is that basic respect for all people is missing. The devilish nature lurking in the depths of human life manifests itself in discrimination and oppression based on ethnic, ideological, and religious differences, and is found to work in the human heart that accepts and condones such discrimination and oppression. Since other remedies haven't worked, we could ask, is there a spiritual solution to the problem of social injustice? The sages taught that every person has a divine nature, an inner essence that utterly untainted by worldly imperfections. They called it the true self, and they described it as pure consciousness that is unborn, uncreated, perfect, full, and complete. That consciousness happens to be your own awareness, the awareness that enables you to perceive the world, the awareness by which you know your innermost thoughts and your deepest emotions. To discover the true divine nature of your own consciousness is to become enlightened, and that's the goal of spiritual practice. When the teachings lead you to discover your consciousness to be fundamentally divine, you simultaneously realize that the very same divinity is present in every single person. After gaining this insight, it's absolutely impossible to judge anyone as being inferior or undesirable. When I traveled to India in 2013, we asked our tour guide about the caste system and if it was as widely practiced today as it was in the past. He told us that it is still practiced, but that the younger generations do not follow it as strictly as their parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents did in the past. In the process of looking for a spiritual answer for curing hatred and racism, I came across this story about caste system in which Shankara, who expressed his strong conviction that all beings are essentially divine. At the time, Shankara lived in Kashi, a sacred city on the banks of the holy Ganges River, a place that's believed to be the earthly abode of Lord Shiva. We call this place Varanasi. As the story goes, early in the morning, Shankara went to bathe in the river accompanied by some of his students. This purifying bath was considered necessary before they could perform their daily rituals of worship. While returning from the river, they were confronted by an outcast, a so-called untouchable. According to Orthodox religious rules, contact with the untouchable would make them ritually impure and prevent them from carrying out their daily worship. So Shankara told the untouchable, "Go away, go away." As you probably know, Hindu culture is said to have 4 distinct social groups called castes: priests, warriors, merchants, and laborers. Those born outside these 4 castes, like foreigners or aborigines, are called outcasts or untouchables. Yet outcasts are people like you and me. So from a secular point of view, rules that forbid contact with them could be considered religiously sanctioned forms of discrimination. So how did these rules of religious purity, the basis of discrimination, rise in the first place? How did God create the world? It is said that the Brahmin priests came from God's mouth, and from his arms came mighty warriors. The merchants sprang from his legs, and from his feet, the laborers. This passage refers to the four castes, not to define a social structure or to prescribe any rules, but to explain how God, in his ultimate source is the ultimate source from which all human beings were created. All this time, at the time this story was composed, people happened to belong to one of four already existent social groups that we now call castes. The priests chanted prayers, so they are depicted as coming from God's mouth. The warriors wore weapons, so they were described as coming from his arms. Merchants were traders and farmers, so they were represented as coming from his legs. And the entire society stood upon the work of laborers, who are therefore depicted as coming from God's feet. Note that no social group is depicted here as being superior or inferior, but as Hinduism evolved, the original intent of this story was apparently lost and new meanings were ascribed. For example, priests were given the highest status among the four castes, while laborers were consigned to the lowest level. How did this happen? Priests were responsible for interpreting the scriptures, so it's possible that some of them interpreted the text in ways that benefited members of their own caste, even at the expense of others. The point here is the scriptures themselves did not mandate caste divisions, nor did they sanction any kind of discrimination. The social injustice that later arose was supported by the misinterpretation in the scriptures. According to the story, the untouchable was actually Lord Shiva himself, who appeared in the guise of an outcast or untouchable to teach Shankara an important lesson. The lesson being that both were divine and utterly untainted by worldly imperfections. So why did they treat the untouchable with such contempt? Because Shankara was a product of his culture, and at the time, orthodox rules of ritualistic purity were taken very seriously. Even though he knew better, he was socially conditioned to avoid contact with untouchables. As we noted before, prejudice and discrimination are deeply embodied in human culture. To address this misunderstanding of chakras, Lord Shiva himself, in the form of an untouchable, began to teach him with the following example. The empty space inside a precious golden vessel or inside an ordinary clay pot, the space within them is exactly the same. Each of these pots is different in color, style, and shape, yet the space inside them is exactly the same. The color, style, and shape of each pot belongs to the pot, not the space within. In the same way, the color, ancestry, and gender of your body belongs to your body, not to you. Your essential nature as pure consciousness is not male or female, not Indian or American, not brown or white. Another example would be when the sun's shining rays are reflected by the holy Ganges River or by a filthy puddle in a village of outcasts, what difference does it make? Sunlight doesn't get contaminated when it shines on filthy water, nor does it become more holy when it shines on the Ganges. Sunlight is completely unaffected by whatever it comes in contact with. In the same way, the pure consciousness that abides within us all is completely unaffected by its contact with our bodies and minds. Whether we happen to be saints or sinners, the consciousness within us remains the same, immaculate and divine. Your consciousness is independent of all of that. Space isn't stuck inside these pots. Space can't be confined inside. The pots are all filled by the same vast, formless space that pervades the universe. In the same way, consciousness isn't stuck inside your head or confined to your body. After all, it's your body that has size and shape, not pure consciousness. Consciousness has no size, no dimensions, no edge or boundary. Consciousness is vast, limitless, all pervasive like space. Therefore, the same all pervasive consciousness is simultaneously manifest in you, in me, and in every living being. This consciousness is the supreme reality, the highest truth, the divinity of each being. When you meet people, you see only their bodies, not their true inner nature. What's inside them is exactly the same pure consciousness that happens to be your true nature. All pervasive consciousness manifests in the mind and body of every single living being. That consciousness is the observer or awareful witness of the world. Because consciousness is all pervasive, it simultaneously illuminates the activities taking place in each and every mind, revealing everything that happens to be seen, heard, smelled, tasted, or touched. It is the very same consciousness that looks out into the world through your eyes and through my eyes. These teachings clearly show the true nature of every person to be the same limitless, all-pervasive consciousness. That all-pervasive consciousness is indeed the divinity that abides in every person, regardless of their physical appearance or their family ancestry. These powerful teachings, when deeply imbibed, can remove every trace of prejudice and discrimination, and replace it with love, acceptance, and respect for all. I would like to leave you with this balance sheet of life. The most destructive habit, worry. The greatest joy, giving. The most satisfying work, helping others. The ugliest personality trait, selfishness. The greatest shot in the arm, encouragement. The greatest problem to overcome, fear. The most effective sleeping pill, peace of mind. The most crippling failure disease, excuses. The most powerful force in life, love. The most dangerous act, a gossip. The world's most incredible computer, the brain. The worst thing to be without, hope. The deadliest weapon, the tongue. The two most powerful, power-filled words, I can. The greatest asset, faith. The most worthless emotion, self-pity. The most beautiful attire, a smile. The most prized possession, integrity. The most powerful channel of communication, prayer. The most courageous spirit, enthusiasm. Life ends when you stop dreaming. Hope ends when you stop believing. Love ends when you stop caring. So please share this balance sheet of life. Friendship ends when you stop sharing.